Project Zero and the Prostate Cancer Foundation and these other wonderful advocacy groups have come together this year, and I think you've already talked about this probably. There's several asks, but just to repeat them again, we'd like to see the National Cancer Institute funding go up, obviously, from $294 million, that's about $300 million, to $400 million, 36% increase. Our second ask is for the Department of Defense dollars to go from 80 to 120 million. That's a big lift. The third ask is for an Office of Men's Health to be established in the Department of Health and Human Services, like we have an Office of Women's Health. The fourth ask is that the Food and Drug Administration have a scientific advisory board, or have on their scientific advisory board somebody that cares about prostate cancer and knows about it. The fifth is something that Mike Milken calls human capital, and let me come back to that again. But the first about these asks, 80 to 120 million in the Defense Department, 300 to 400 million in National Cancer Institute. How do you justify that? Well, one way is to look at the funding for breast cancer, which is twice as high when you look at it on a per-death basis. Now, it recognized that breast cancer will many times afflict young women with children, and sometimes they're single mothers. And that is a gut-wrenching, heartbreaking issue. But increasingly, prostate cancer affects younger and younger men. Often they're the men who are the sole breadwinners for these young families. And often they're people who are leading significant efforts, and we can't afford to lose them. It was prostate cancer, which is treatable. You can get 2 or 3 years. Dr. Logothetis at MD Anderson, probably the world's best, said, now look, if you want to be aggressive here, we'll do chemotherapy, hormones, and radiation all at once, and we're going to bring you to your knees, and your libido's going to be gone, and your memory's going to be weakened, and your ambition, and your energy. And I remember my father, when he had a similar choice for leukemia, saying, no, I'll trust in the good Lord. And my father was gone in 5 weeks. So I said, well, maybe God has other plans for me. I'm going to trust in Dr. Logothetis. And I went through all that treatment. And sure enough, he was right. My libido was gone the next day. But as my wife pointed out, I was more efficient because I wasn't doing all this when the pretty girls walked by. Now, this was 9.5 years ago. I had it was natural to turn and look at a pretty girl. Well, I didn't do that anymore. And I will say this to the men in this room who know men who are thinking of skipping out on this treatment. Nah, I don't want that treatment. I'll say that although it destroyed our sex life, it improved our love life. My wife and I got on better than ever after all that. Let me mention in closing, I got an unexpected remission. And I've had 5 recurrences since. 5 times I've been through chemotherapy, radiation, experimental treatments. Every time there's an experimental treatment that you can sign up for, I sign up for it. And I am the hospital's #1 guinea pig. And it gave me a whole new life I didn't expect to have. I had withdrawn from so many things. And one day my second son was looking in my closet for some reason. I said, what are you looking at? He said, I'm looking at Granddaddy's World War II uniform. Granddaddy, my father, had been a much decorated Army surgeon in World War II. 4 years, tuberculosis, almost died. He'd been an orphan. It was an American success story. And so my son was looking at that Army uniform, and he was only 7 years old at a time when little boys are crazy about the military. And he looked up at me, gave me a look. I said, "Get off to school, Henry." And I went down past the bedroom and said, "Roxanne, I'm going to join the Army Reserve, even if they do send me to Iraq." This was in 2004. She said, "When pigs fly." And I went down and joined that Army Reserve. They first said, "You're too old." And I said, "No, I get a waiver for that, I'm sure." They said, "Well, you must be in perfect health." I said, "I am, except for metastatic prostate cancer." Sergeant Martinez at the recruiting station just shook his head at that. But I did get a waiver. They were desperate for doctors in the Army. And sure enough, they sent me all over the place. Kuwait, Thailand, Iraq, Afghanistan, and we had lots of adventures. I lost my hearing. I had a bad injury. I was a patient in the combat support hospital in Baghdad. I had the good fortune to meet a little white-haired man who came over there as part of a congressional task force, and he called me a few months later, and he said, "This is Bob Gates. I'd like you to be Assistant Secretary of Defense." I said, "I don't know anything about government or management." And he said, "Well, we'll support you." He said, "I want somebody that's been an Army doctor and been an Army patient running that thing, because we got problems in our system." So I got what my wife called a midlife crisis, joining the Army at 52, as she says, because you don't have enough money to buy a Maserati and you don't have enough nerve to take a mistress. And of course I had to remind her that I'm on that hormone treatment that makes the mistress situation quite irrelevant. But she called that my midlife crisis, and there I was in uniform and in Baghdad getting rocketed and shelled at in a combat support hospital. Anyway, it led to a wonderful time to serve in Washington, and it sure takes your mind off having cancer. I'm the only person in the Army, history of the Army, that ever had chemotherapy in a war zone, I think. But through all these adventures and all the recurrences of cancer, always just being caught by some new medication just as I'm really at death's door. All of it, and living to where my youngest, my daughter, I lived to see her turn 13 5 days ago, like I had asked God, was made possible by you. Thank you very much. God bless you.